Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking to you today about unpacking B2D or business to developer success and building products that developers choose to use. But when we first look at this, it's probably worth starting with this amazing quote that's been used everywhere. More than a decade ago, Mark Andreessen of Andreessen and Horowitz wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal titled Why Software is Eating the World, highlighting the shift from a hardware-based world to something that was run by software. I think it's definitely safe to say in our time right now that software is the world. It's not even eating it. And that nearly every startup that we see is focusing on enabling and growing the software paradigm. It's worth actually understanding as well, what does this mean? So there was a survey done back in 2019 to understand what was happening in the developer space. And in 2019, there was data to suggest a conservative estimate of about 19 million active developers in 2019. We see that this number will more than double by the time we get to 2030, which is less than a decade away. And I look at all of this growth in the users and all of these new products that could potentially be created to help them in this world. I know we're going to see a growth in open source projects and products that help to make developers more productive in this space. Last but not least, PitchBook data shows that in 2008, business to developer startups globally raised about 20 million in 38 deals. And in 2019, almost 10 times that amount for $2 billion in 268 deals. In 2020, we saw that number jump up to $3 billion. And the first half of 2021 was set to actually equal that amount. So according to estimates, the size of software and services market for developers globally is approaching $40 billion, and that number is expected to rise. So it definitely is, I think, a very exciting time to be jumping into the space if you are a product manager, to see actually how we could be helping developers there. It's at this moment that I'll actually introduce myself. My name is Yetunde Dada. I am a director of product management at QuantumBlack, and I'm a product manager that specifically focuses on building productivity tooling specifically for data scientists, machine learning engineers, and data engineers. I've been in the space for the last 5 years, in my first bit as a user of this tooling, and now actually as a creator of it. So I'm really passionate about making sure that we build the right things that help people here. I am a maintainer of Kedro, which is our case study product I'll be talking about today, and I work at a company called QuantumBlack. QuantumBlack represents all of McKinsey and Company's analytics capabilities. So what you imagine in this space is thousands of people doing data science consultancy and helping many companies around the world, I think, achieve their dream of seeing machine learning systems in production and generating value from them. I mentioned that we're going to be talking about Kedro, and I'm going to be, I think, specifically basing a lot of the content on how I've approached doing things specifically in Kedro with the amazing team that is part of it. You'll see what's good to note over here at a high level is that Kedro has both a back end and a front end, and the back end is typically where the developers write code in it, and they interact with the code API, and it's also open source. Kedro is an open source Python framework created for what we call ML and data practitioners. That's the group of data scientists, data engineers, and machine learning engineers. We recently released it to the Linux Foundation's AI and Data Incubator because it was just such a force, I think, in the open source community. And what it does, essentially, is it helps data scientists apply software engineering best practice to their code, solving a lot of problems that happen when you're producing prototype models, but you actually need to take them into production systems. In normal worlds, that means that you have to rewrite a lot of sections of that code base in order to get it to work. And Kedro actually helps streamline that a lot by providing guardrails for people to use, which makes that code easier to convert into that production code. If you are familiar with web frameworks, Kedro is actually similar to React. But it's more like React for the Python world, React for the data science world, which people use. And we'll see that we've won like a host of awards in the space for it just being great as a technical framework for people. And if you're on GitHub, please do start the repo as well. So I definitely do think it's worth getting on the same page for which definition of product manager we're going to be talking about today. And the group that I'd like to focus on in particular is whether or not you're a product manager building a technical product or actually a technical product manager. And I'll see if I can try actually help differentiate them for you. But we're definitely dialing in on your experience of being a product manager building a technical product. The difference between the two actually lies in where you choose to focus more of your attention. Is it in product discovery where you're focused on creating a prototype with your design and engineering teams that helps validate risk that your product or the prototype or feature may be facing on the value, usability, feasibility, and business viability spectrum, which was pioneered by Marty Kagan? Or do you spend most of your time on delivery, which is the period of focusing on, well, you have a prototype and you need to make sure that the prototype is built in the right way. And you might be asking questions about performance, accessibility, reliability, security, and privacy. If it's more on the discovery side, you would be more of a product manager with varying levels of technical experience trying to work on a technical product. But if it's more on the delivery side and you're purely focused on like delivering the right thing, then you might be more of a technical product manager in that sense. The reason I don't do most of the delivery work is because I rely on my tech lead, actually on my team, tech and design leads actually to finish the delivery work that we need to do with me doing minor check-ins. I do spend most of my time to date on the discovery side, making sure that we are building the right thing. This is actually where it's worth mentioning that most of your product management toolkit that you would have used across the spectrum of product management is still very relevant in the space, even when you're building technical products. You need to answer questions like, why are we building this? Is this the most important thing that we should be doing right now? What is the most minimal thing that our users will choose to use and choose to love because it solves their problems in the best way? And how will we know that we were successful because we track and measure to get those things? But there are some differences that would apply if you're building technical products. Most likely that your users are quite technical, so they're speaking in different languages and have different needs. Your prototyping and research methods will look a bit different, and we will go into that. And obviously, there is a heavier skew towards engineering, and you will have to rely on your engineers in a different way because it's better as you talk to your users. So what I'm going to actually present is what I call your survival kit as a product manager that builds technical products. And we're going to look at 4 key elements for success in this space. And the first one is know your worth. I'll go into more about what that means in terms of imposter syndrome and you just being able to stand your ground in the space, especially when you're encountering many technical terms, technical users, working with engineers deep in the technical architecture. And I was quite drawn to this quote by Lauren Chan Lee. She was a director of product management at care.com. And she says, know your value add. I've seen 3 main PM archetypes: an engineer turned PM, a designer turned PM, and a business person turned PM. As a member of the latter bucket, the business turned PM, I recognize that I could never out-engineer an engineer or out-design a designer. Instead, I leverage my knowledge of our business and customers to better prioritize what features make it onto the roadmap and help my team understand why we're building those features. And this is really where you have to understand for yourself, why are you there? What value are you actually bringing to the team in ways or maybe with skill sets that your other team members don't have? Because you all bring something into the space. And it's also about figuring out as well, what auxiliary skills do you need to have complemented to your skill set in order to do the best for your users and the best for the product as you're building it. And as you're building technical products, I will say you will need to have a strong complement of technical skills, and that can be solved in many different ways. It's not to say that you can't necessarily migrate from maybe a designer turned PM or business person turned PM. There's always talk about you maybe having to be an engineer. I don't think so. It's a controversial opinion. I don't think so. But also, how you figure out how to fill up the gaps is the important part if you're not coming from that engineering background. And this is where it's actually probably worth understanding the 5 levels of technical depth, this kind of like scaling thing that I saw on Twitter the other day that was released by the Department of Product. And there's 5 levels. There's obviously the one where like you're sitting in conversations about maybe technical design for users and you have no idea what anyone is talking about. There's a part where you kind of understand what's going on. There's a bit where you might get a bit more knowledge and you understand what's being said, and what it means for your product and for your users. There's a part where you could deeply understand what's being said and implications for the product. And then there's step 5, which is like, not only do you understand things deeply, you also understand the technical architecture and you can build it yourself. You can code it for yourself. And I think product managers in this space will fill across the spectrum. In my experience, I will actually point to saying I joined QuantumBlack as a product manager who, while I had had the need for a product like Kedro, I had no idea what was going on in user discussions and in the prototyping sessions initially, because it was very hard for me to actually translate what was being said with an actual human understandable, easy to understand need. That was actually a principle I got from one of the designers there, where he said every single user problem can be understood in easy English or easy to understand English. And it's my job actually as a product manager to get language into that form, because it means that we can design properly around that, because everyone on the table understands that. So I've actually gone from a journey of moving from point 1 to actually point 4. I sometimes in my working life right now range between broadly understanding and deeply understanding. This one changes based on what we're working on, because if it's a very user-facing feature, and I understand like how the user would interact with it, I tend to sit on 4. But if it's a very low-level technical architecture change that doesn't necessarily have a lot of implications for the user experience, I sometimes sit on 3. And we'll generally ask questions around, do we think that there's any considerations we need to be making? Will we be changing how the user is interacting with the API at any level? What about certain use cases that were supported before and now we're actually maybe changing those things as well? Obviously, on the note of being able to write code, point 5, what I did do, and maybe this is actually pointing to how I've actually moved through this journey of upskilling myself, is I have done a few things to actually move myself further down the level of technical depth. And the first one is an extremely strong partnership with my tech lead and design leads for all of this, in particular my tech lead. Every Monday for 1 hour, we have a meeting where we go through outstanding questions that I might have because I didn't understand something, to the priorities that we want to scope out for the week and for the product. And we talk about the team and everything, and a really strong partnership where you can say, hey, I don't actually understand what's going on here, but could you explain it to me so that I learn? I think is essential for your learning and for your growth. I've also had to get over asking so-called dumb questions, because I really truly believe we know that there's no such thing as a dumb question, but it's sometimes still hard to put yourself out there. But I really do stress and say this, it's far more important to understand the user's problem and what they're trying to do. So put the pride away and just ask those questions, and get what you need out of the discussion. I've also come to learn my engineering team actually does appreciate it when I ask those questions, because sometimes they actually don't know too. So everyone is sitting there and not knowing what's going on. And then the other way that I've had to learn as well is by learning how to use my product, as technical as it is. So Kedro is a code framework. I've gone through data science exercises using it. And also on top of that as well, taking time out to write tutorials myself and write documentation for it, so I can learn how to use it, because it's the fastest way to get up to speed with a very technical product. Learn how to use it yourself and learn what the users are trying to do, and also make notes of where you're running into weird user experiences because certain things have been done there. And then the other thing that I did do, and this speaks to my journey with trying to hit point 5, which is I can write code myself. I can actually write prototype code now. And what I did over there was I signed up for software engineering bootcamp. And yeah, I completed it last year. And that's actually how I've gone the extra mile with upskilling myself in engineering courses as well. It's also, I've done some data science bootcamps as well to try and learn these things. You do whatever you need to do to make sure that you can speak to your users, you can translate well, you can understand users' problems, and you can shorten the amount of time it takes to develop something that they love. Another point 2 that I want to raise, so point 1 was know your worth. Point 2 is not including design as an anti-pattern. And I'll just say that this is something that I've observed with some of the other products where because it's so engineering heavy, because you have very technical users, design is often forgotten. And what I'd love to obviously add over here is a quote by Pete Seeger, who's a product director at DocuSign, who said, "Any damn fool can make something complex. It takes a genius to make something simple." And I would actually love to add here that it takes a design, product, and engineering team to make something simple and make something amazing for users over here. This is sometimes a little bit hard to do. And I think when I moved into Kedro, which was quite engineering led, and there was actually no concept of design thinking when I joined the team, it's kind of hard to do because you have to kind of apply the stuff that you know from your traditional product research and product prototyping process and try find creative ways of making them work for technical products. So what that's meant for us is this has had the particular implications for how we do research. So research is a collaborative effort with design, product, and engineering. All three of us are in our user research sessions, understanding things like from our users. We tend to rely on things like show me what you did, exercises or task completion, observability studies, and even accessing code bases to see how they've implemented something or written it themselves. We also make sure that we're using telemetry, and all three of us as well have access to telemetry data to understand how our users are interacting with different features in terms of usage analytics. And then all three of us will appear in interviews. What that looks like in process in practical terms will be, because obviously this is quite time consuming, is we will have a kickoff session to understand what research question we're trying to understand to see what problems our users are facing there, which would be led by our designer. The designer would also detail as well which research methods we'd be using for that to answer that specific research question and what the outputs would look like ideally, which would have been decided between me, myself, and the tech lead. Me, my design lead, and my tech lead. And how we structure it is we will get feedback. If it's an interview, for instance, from our engineers and designers as well, we'll be commenting on the questions that we need to ask. And we'll do that in session. So we're forced to go through the list of questions in the session. And then how we actually structure the interviews, depending on how many we'll have, is everyone on the team is let known that at least you will appear in one interview, one or more interviews, and we'll book according to your schedule. So all the engineers on the team will have at least like one or two or three interviews in their calendar that they just need to attend after receiving the briefing thing. So there's always a combination of all three skill sets when we do the interview sessions. And then design will lead synthesis. And I found this is super helpful because it allows engineering to firstly get deeply acquainted with the users, but also see for themselves like what's going on with our users. There's an additional part as well where our engineers will now believe the research that comes out there so that we can actually make a change for our users as an end thing. But additionally, because they're there, our research is far more accurate, is far more relevant, and they're also able to ask deeper underlying questions to understand the real user problem that's there. So it's just this beautiful thing that allows research to be done properly. We also definitely apply this pattern to prototyping. So prototyping is once again a design, product, and engineering exercise. But I do have it that design and engineering, and specifically on my team, will lead prototyping as well and develop prototypes together. When prototyping code interfaces, we've had to try some really interesting exercises to try and make this work. So we try and do show and tell exercises where I will show you one in the next slide, where we will show our users like what this code API would look like, and we'll try and fake how it would move or interact with the rest of the Kedro product to see like if you run this command, this will happen, or if you use this bit of the code API, this is what your expected result is. We've also done task completion exercises with very poorly written code base or prototypes that are not robust at all and just purely made to show responses. And then we've also additionally allowed users to create their own code APIs to solve a specific problem that they said that they were facing. Because remember, these are technical users, and they have to explain to us why they've made it in a certain way for us to learn from them as well in the prototyping phase. This is an example of a data catalog options generator that one of our technical designers, Hamza, actually led in collaboration with our tech lead, Ivan. And what you saw was an example of a show and tell exercise where users could see how it would affect their Kedro project. And they were allowed to give us feedback based on that. So you obviously have to be a little bit creative with like how you apply prototyping methodology to technical products, especially when it's code, because that's I guess, the more unusual thing. I'm just going to actually speak over this one, but you actually may need new skill sets on your team in order to make your technical product workflow work. So particular changes I'd like to highlight here are you might have actually used maybe product marketing previously, but for technical products, rely more on the developer advocacy skill set, which is the person whose job it is to make sure that developers have an awesome time onboarding onto the product, learning about the product as well as also being able to continue to use it as well. And developer advocacy will span the whole thing of doing presentations, demos, answering Q&A, troubleshooting with users as well. There's different skill sets, and obviously in this space as well, there's subspecialities as well for what you may need. It's always very helpful to have an engineering mindset applied to this, essentially product marketing, in order to make this one work. For the designer skill set as well, so my team currently at this moment has UI UX designers and I think visual designers as well, because Kedro does have a front end. But we have remarked that we do have a deep need for more technical design, which is typically a role that I've had to play. And in this case, hiring a UX engineer is sometimes the term that you're looking for to help with usability testing and prototyping on the code side, or looking for technical UX designers is something that you might have to look into if you're designing code interfaces or platforms, essentially. And then you may also need to have technical writers as well. So documentation is a very important component for onboarding for developers, and having someone that can work through documentation, write tutorials, also edit content that is produced by the team is highly essential as well for making sure that you have users that have an easy time finding information that they need while they're using your product. We also talk as well as the fourth point as well. So we now know third point was you may need new team members, and fourth point now is advocacy is not the end state. So there's a typical model of product success that will say, like, if your user is so happy to recommend this product and try to get their mom to use the product, then you're successful. I actually go a step further and say, not only that, but if they want to contribute to the project or contribute to making your product more successful, that's actually the end state. So you typically will have users moving through this funnel as you get to know them, and it's all about a conversion game. How do you get them to move to the next level? So at first, they will become aware of the product. They might choose to use it on a personal project. So you see them prototyping or trialing it at home because they're really excited about what this thing could represent. And they want to get a hang on it before they try and demo it maybe at work and suggest to their tech leads that, hey, could we possibly use this piece of software here? Because I found it really great. I've tried it on my work and here's how it works. From there, you'd hope that they would translate into becoming an advocate. We actually call our advocates on Kedro Kedroids because they're forces in the community for answering Q&A for other users, for writing out tutorials and documentation on their own, for helping onboard new users as well. And the last stage as well is when they decide to actually contribute code back to the project, because Kedro is open source, where you see that they've gone the full mile, and they're the ultimate users and ultimate people that help you build your product as well. So the whole goal is to make sure that we basically move users through this entire process so that they get there. So with that, I'm actually gonna. This draws us to the end of the presentation. This is actually the Kedro team in full. Well, mostly, I think we're missing our designers from this picture. This represents this incredible team that has allowed us to build Kedro to the success actually that it is, and continue to make it like highly successful. On that note of last points that you should be aware of course, QuantumBlack is hiring across the entire scope of disciplines as well. So if you do find that you're interested in this, do let me know. You can definitely reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn and find me there. I'll stop here and thank you so much. I'll be answering questions in the chat.